I would like to call a meeting of the Park and Road Impact Fee Review Board. I would recognize that we have 2 members present constituting a quorum. Are there any attendees that would request to be noted for the record? Recognizing Matt Price is attending online. And then for the board matters, the first item is swearing in of board members. And Tony, I would assume that.
So we do have some sheets next to your materials, which basically are your oaths of office. If we can just have you sign those, we'll have them notarized by Amy Lacey here today. If you have any questions on those, we'd be happy to answer that.
I have no questions. None here. The next item on the agenda is the election of officers, a chairperson and vice chairperson. I would entertain motions for chairperson.
I'll nominate yourself, Jim, for chairperson.
I'll accept the nomination. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed? The motion passes 2-0. The next office would be the vice chairperson. I would nominate Tony Murley.
I'll accept.
And I'd call for a vote. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed? Motion passes 2-0. Then call for an appointment of the secretary. I would nominate John Demery.
So I don't want to interrupt. The secretary has typically been, in the past, it was Wayne DeLong. Typically, the secretary's duties are documentation of the meetings, keeping record of all of the documents that go through your board. So we could continue to keep that precedent and keep it in a director role. If we could, Mike Dale is the new director of the Community Economic Development Department. We also have Lance here, who is the director of DPW. Either of them would be appropriate individuals to serve in that role, should you see fit.
What was the first name again of the first person?
Oh, Mike Dale.
Mike Dale. Okay.
I would nominate Mike to serve as secretary.
I will second. Call for a vote. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion passes 2-0. Then the next item is the acknowledgement of correspondence received.
I don't think we received any correspondence worth noting.
Thank you. Then the next item is old business. Is there any old business? Then we'll move along to new business, which would be the adoption of an electronic meeting policy. Tony, did you have any questions about the policy?
No questions. No.
I also have no questions or comments. Do you have comments?
No, I was just here to answer any questions. It's a standard operating procedure after the rescission of the governor's order. But all of our boards with the town have something very similar to what you guys have to allow for electronic meetings. So you guys are good.
Thank you.
Perfect. I'll make a motion to approve.
I will second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion passes 2-0. The next item of business is an appeal for RL Racing Corporation headquarters on Creekway. Is there anyone representing the petitioner?
Yes, good afternoon. Ashton Fritz with Fritz Engineering. We are here representing Ray Hall Letterman Lanigan Racing, as none of their folks were able to attend here. As you're aware, they have built a new racing headquarters within the Creekside Corporate Park. And I heard the number this morning is general investment of over $21 million in that facility. And part of that included a new access drive that they had coordinated with early on, access from Bennett Parkway through a property that fell through, and then they were able to make a new agreement with the folks at Tri-Phase and get spend about another $500,000 in improvements to that building and in obtaining access for their over the road haulers, which are essentially large semi trucks, to gain access to the north side of their building where they store those trucks inside. And the appeal here today is in regards to the road impact fee in the amount of, I think it's thought I had it. $30,952, which was assessed at the time of development plan application based on the road impact fee estimate request that was filed with the development. Be glad to answer any other questions anybody might have.
In looking at your drawing, could you kind of orient me as to?
Yeah, is there a way to do it other than me walking up there?
Probably not.
Yeah, so not too. This is Bennett Parkway running north-south, 106th Street down near Creekway over here. This is the Ray Hall site. And this is Tri-Phase. So this is the improvement. They have to put a new curb cut in off of Bennett Parkway and then improve this pavement section for their heavier trucks that are coming in and out. Then this connection here, which is gated. And this is their truck court in the back, and then they have overhead doors that they can pull their trucks and store them inside.
Good, thank
That
you.
makes sense. You able to see that?
Yeah, yeah. Did you provide how much additional funds were spent on the changes that were required?
Yeah, it was approximately 500,000.
No, 500. Is that what you? Okay. Was that only for the entrance into the actual facility itself, or were there also improvements for actual town streets as well? So there were maybe some curbs or things that had to be put in place.
That was strictly for the improvements of the drive from Bennett Parkway
Okay.
to the Ray Hall site.
Okay.
We had looked at several different options of other ways to gain access for these trucks, including potentially a new drive on 106th Street, which was not ideal from a lot of aspects, but it would keep it on their property. Then also improvements to Creek Way, the median there at 106th Street was problematic for the trucks making large turns into there. And then the actual site access for RLL was pretty quick once you turned onto Creekway. So we ran all kinds of analysis, and it would have required pretty much removing that entire median, which is kind of a staple for the park. And so it was decided that this was getting off of Bennett Parkway through an industrial use building was the most appropriate.
Matt, have you reviewed their calculations?
Yeah, I have. I mean, from my perspective, it's pretty straightforward. I think we generalized it as a light industrial, did the calculation based on that. I don't think there's a misunderstanding of land use or anything like that. It's just their credits based on what the improvements they did. So from my perspective, it's pretty straightforward.
And did we do a calculation, or it's not being assumed that so then the fee was not incorrectly calculated, and there was, and it is the amount of the impact fee is a legal amount?
Yeah, we're not disputing that. We had submitted the estimate request based on the number of employees, the number of vehicle trips that they anticipate, both employees, visitors, trucks, and then the calculation was done based on that. And we don't have an objection to the calculation. We're just asking for appeal of the fee itself.
Do we have any comments from the town representatives?
I think a comment I would make initially is not specific to this project necessarily, but it's just kind of a recap of impact fees, what's allowed under state law, and what elements of the state law the town has elected to charge an impact fee for transportation. The enabling statutes allow for impact fees to be collected for a lot of things. It lists drainage, it lists a number of improvements. The town charges a fee based on roadway network capacity. So it's how many more vehicles are going to be on our network. And at the first level, the evaluation should come as were the improvements that are seeking to be credited or abated or otherwise waived, did they somehow mitigate traffic on the area network? So that's what I just wanted to make that general statement, because you'll hear a lot of things likely that today that are eligible for impact fees, but we don't charge for impact fees. It's only for network capacity. And that means added travel lanes and intersection capacity improvements. So just that general comment on the approach the town is taking with impact fees and its limited scope and what it actually charges people for. So I'm happy to answer specific questions. I think the board has an important task before them today to determine the appropriateness of the request, probably on many levels. So I'm happy to answer any specific questions that you have that may come up throughout the proceedings.
I would assume it, looking at the drawing, that basically this drive access basically services one user.
Maybe Mr. Fritz could answer that. I don't know if there's a joint use agreement with the property next.
I didn't hear the question.
How many different properties are going to be served by the driveway?
The improved one that RLL did, it serves tri-phase because it goes through their property. But they don't use it. They had an existing drive entrance and only one drive entrance on the south side of their property. So this was a new drive entrance off of Bennett Parkway added specifically for access to RLL. We had looked at using the maneuvering of the large trucks in and around their property and their building made it difficult to get them to the RLL property. So a straight shot from Bennett Parkway was decided to be the best route to do it. So it was only done for RLL, but it's not closed at Bennett Parkway. It is gated at the property line. So only RLL visitors and employees, deliveries can get through there. But there's nothing restricting tri-phase employees from coming into their site at that entrance.
I would say on projects that we've looked at in the past, where basically a new facility that they're asking for a waiver of the impact fee that essentially services a single user. So for instance, this drive was built for the sole purpose of servicing RLL, and that we have denied, in the past, we have denied those waivers.
So out of the 500,000 spent for this, for the addition that needed to be done, does anything benefit the roads specifically that the town is responsible for? Is it kind of what Jim's saying? Is it mainly for the benefit of one user? Were they improved? Is there?
I would say that there is a benefit to the town in general because you're not concentrating the heavy traffic
Yeah.
in a less than optimal maneuvering situation,
Mhm.
which could slow
damage.
or introduce inefficiencies on 106th Street. So I can appreciate that the second backdoor entrance was provided because it offers a better distribution of the different vehicle types leaving the site. So to the extent, can it be quantified? No.
Mhm.
But is there some benefit? Yeah, I think there's a good case to be made that there is some regional benefit to the second drive beyond just the single user.
Yeah, part of our study when we were reviewing various options included, as I mentioned, 106th Street access that would have provided the trucks the entrance, and it would have required improvements all the way back to Bennett Parkway, including turn lane, taper, which they were willing to do, but adding that traffic to 106th Street as opposed to getting them off of there and onto Bennett Parkway and Industrial Road seemed to be the better option.
I might offer what Ashton may be too polite to say, which is the town did not look favorably at all on a second entrance. So if they had an operational need and we're talking about an entrance, a new drive cut on 106th Street, we were not at all excited about that option.
And as I think I mentioned at the beginning, that when RLL was first negotiating the land acquisition and development with the town, there was a representation that this secondary access off of Bennett Parkway would be provided, and how that was to be provided never got vetted until later on. And when we were involved and we were trying to figure out how we were getting it through various, and I think there was a misunderstanding somewhere along the lines. I don't know with whom or through whom, but it was an expense that they incurred that they were not anticipating as part of this project.
You have any other questions or comments?
No, I mean, to me, is this a situation where a credit is being asked for because expenditures were made? I think in the ordinance, is there a discussion about credits perhaps that are available for expenditures? I don't know if that's referenced in the ordinance or not.
Reference in the ordinance and reference in the state statutes.
Okay.
The credits are permitted under some circumstances when it's for the public good,
Okay. Does that have to occur at a certain point in time?
not to my knowledge.
Not upon permitting or at planning stage or anything like that?
Well, there's some limits about when you file the applications, but I think we've continued this hearing for a length of time. So I don't think that those time periods are applicable here.
And that is what we'd be looking at here, is issuing a credit as opposed to a waiver of the impact fee.
Well, I don't think that requesting a waiver meets the criteria set forth in the ordinance or the statute. So I think if there was going to be some adjustment, it would probably be through the credit analysis.
That's questions I have.
Can I ask the board a question? Because there are credits, which in my mind are reduction amounts to the calculated fee based on some justification. And there's also an in lieu situation where a developer can make certain improvements and then be charged against their impact fees and then not pay the impact fee if it's an eligible project. So when we're talking about credit, I don't know what the status of this application is. Our standard practice when the fees are in excess of $5,000 is the applicant can pay a deposit at the time of permitting and say, we intend to appeal this, but then they can pay that $5,000 deposit and then move on with their project. And whenever the board hears their plea, they certainly can. So is this I don't know what the application status is on this, and that might come from our CED. Has any money been paid as far as the road impact fee goes, or is what's the status of payment? Because if you would want to do a complete while he's walking up, a complete waiver would, if they paid any amount, would result in a refund to the applicant. If they haven't paid anything, then it's kind of just a paper task.
So I believe they have paid $5,000. I can double check that here quickly in our database, but I believe they did pay $5,000 up front.
So since this, when you talk about credits or in lieu, you would expect future work. So I think that the board has to dispense with this today in either just a waiver, because there's not like they're going to go around find another project or somewhere else to pay a credit. So this is likely a refund. If you would happen to waive all of the fees, we would refund them their money. So that's, I think, helping us all understand, what the process is to conclude this, and be careful when we use the term credits in lieu. And frankly, these are just waivers. And Matt, I'm not going to speak for Matt, but he is the expert on this. So don't hesitate to tap into his knowledge.
No, I think
He's across the state.
you hit the nail on the head. Yeah.
Okay. Got my questions.
Good. Would you like to make a motion? I would tell you kind of more I'm at with it is that if it did not service the other driveway, the other property, then I would just deny it. Yeah. But it has benefit to the town. Therefore, I believe that some amount of relief is warranted.
Yeah. And do we have Matt, do we have the power to assign or waive a portion of that fee?
Yeah, you can.
Based upon
Yeah, you
that
can. It
there
can be
was
0. It can be whatever our calculation was, in this case 32, or it could be some number that you deem is creditable. If you say, okay, half of it's creditable. I mean,
I think the portion is reasonable because there was a ask to have to change. And there was a change in the expectation.
So based on our database, there has been no fees paid at this time associated with the road impact fee. So that's where they stand at this point.
Know what that portion is.
You have an opinion?
I do not have an opinion.
So, I mean, typically you would say a quarter or 1/2, right? Is probably a reasonable
Yes,
meeting of in the middle,
I was thinking.
half. Okay. Can make a motion. I'll make a motion to waive 50% of the road impact fees.
I will second. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Those opposed? Motion passes 2-0. 2-0.
Thank you.
The next item on the agenda is an appeal for Appaloosa Crossing Shops. 3091 South US 421.
Yes. Go ahead. Go ahead and see those. Everything you submitted, they have in their packets.
Perfect. Thank you.
Don't want to jump the gun here, but
No, if you're ready, please proceed.
perfect. Thank you so much. My name is Kyle Resiteritz. I'm a partner at Denton's, standing in for Matt Price, representing Harris FLP. we did note that Matt Price is here via Zoom as well, so I anticipate he'll be part of the discussion. As many of you may know, Harris FLP received plan approval and completed construction relative to certain road improvements in connection with its retail center at the southeastern side of Michigan Road and County Road 300. Those improvements included improvements to the intersection, drainage improvements, serving that intersection, resurfacing the roadways at that intersection, turning and improving certain turning lanes as well. Certainly, we think that completed infrastructure will serve the betterment of that intersection as a whole, in addition to the Appaloosa Crossing development that Harris FLP owns and is developing. We discussed those credits in 2020 at the time of the initial retail building proposal, and at the time of that those construction plans were approved and permitted by the town, had formally requested a impact fee credit in a timely manner in 2021 at the time of the fee assessment. That fee assessment is just a tick over $94,000, $94,128. We understood certainly at the time that the town was willing to consider a credit for certain of the improvements in connection with Harris FLP's construction work at that intersection, but understood given the amounts to be spent at the time still needed to be determined, that credit determination wasn't made at the time either. So we viewed that as a work in progress discussion to still be had. That fee credit has certainly not been established yet. We recently supplied the construction cost information to the town. You have that in your packet. Zach just mentioned that. We also have a certification from Jerry Williams, the engineer at Strongbox Commercial. Strongbox served as the general contractor's representative for the construction of the improvements and the infrastructure. So he's provided a certification of the costs involved in the US 421 and County Road 300 expenditures to date. While the agenda item was certainly framed as an appeal, there's not a credit amount to be appealed at the time. So we understand that part of the meeting today would be a single combined meeting to discuss potentially the board's decision or decision process relative to our request for a credit. And hopefully we can come to a decision today on that. And I'm here to try to answer any questions that you might have. Matt Price and I have been involved with the project from moment one of it, but certainly Matt is well-versed and more versed than I am on some of the specifics. So we might just sort of exchange comments between me in person and Matt online, but wanted to make sure that we were both available for you today. And we'll leave it at that.
Good. I would ask the same thing of you, if you could come up and kind of, we have a number of drawings here, if you could kind of orient us and show us what the improvements are.
Sure.
Wait, you may have to come up to do that as well.
Yes, sir. So
Page 7 to 43. Actually, 6 is the first one. Number 6 is the first one that I had in my exhibit B, page 6.
Yeah, so this would be facing north is this direction.
Okay.
And so this is US 421, County Road 300 running west and east there. So this is the southern boundary of the Appaloosa Crossing development, and then extending north.
So the blue would be the improvements that were made, or that are these these have the costs incurred then on the exhibit A. Is that
Correct.
Okay.
Although I would note that
Mhm.
to my understanding of how strong Box has highlighted that not all of the blue improvements are necessarily connected to the road infrastructure
Okay,
improvements that we'd be asking for credit for. I guess the credit for the back fees related there too. So I think some of the more critical elements are actually outlined in the so sorry for some confusion. Blue, I think here is actually water, just representing water. Not just a detention pond.
yeah, I need the color, I need the yellow.
So,
highlight.
yeah,
These
exactly.
are the little cloud box around the areas. Okay. That's the cloud box.
And then
Yep.
as you flip the page to the next page, again, we're just sort of following north. The site is very vertical northeast right there, or north to south, excuse me. And so we're just following the road improvements up 420, 421 in the next two or three
So
drawings.
if I look at drawing 7, it looks like almost all the whole area is circled. Is there like there's a middle road that goes in between these properties then too that?
Correct. So
Okay.
this, that
Yep.
road that you're pointing to right there
Sure.
is an entrance, is the first entrance up into US 421 to Appaloosa Crossing.
Okay, and that's Appaloosa Crossings, not Town Road or anything like that. That's the developments. This is the developments
Correct.
roadway parking lot.
So the improvements, I think are best maybe highlighted on page 8 and 9, particularly 9. There were improvements at the intersection of
Mhm.
US 421 and County Road 300. Drainage improvements serving that intersection, as well as a resurfacing of the roads leading to up 421 and then on County Road 300 as well. And there was I believe a turning lane added.
Coming this direction.
Correct, so coming west
Across.
down 300 into
Mhm.
the northern access point to Appaloosa Crossing.
Okay.
It's shown.
This is, yeah.
Having them not stable and stacking them up to against each other. A good way of starting that.
Good.
And Mr. Chairman, if I could speak briefly as well, this is Matt Price.
Go ahead, Matt.
Could we turn the volume up a little bit?
Okay, thank you. Appreciate the opportunity to address the board this afternoon. And it's, I guess, picking up in some ways on the discussion you just had with regard to the Ray Hall facility. It's some of the same themes, but I wanted to clarify a couple of points. So this project is a project where it's a first phase of the commercial development at the southeast corner of Michigan and 146th Street. And when I say first phase, this is for the first building that went up back in, between 21 and 22. And at the initial phases of looking at this development, we had some discussions with Mr. Lance about the potential for impact fee credits. And he discussed it in very much the same terms that you've heard here this afternoon, which is the idea that if you have a project that would otherwise, where the developer is building infrastructure that would otherwise be paid for with an impact fee, then you're entitled to a credit. And so our position is that our project is such infrastructure that contributes to the functionality and capacity of the intersection and would be entitled to a credit because at least a portion of these improvements would otherwise be paid for with the impact fees themselves. So we're not asking for a waiver of impact fees, and I don't think there's any statutory authority or predicate for a waiver, although I understand why that word is sometimes used. We're just simply asking for a credit, and the credit amount we're seeking is in the amount of the initial assessment of $94,128, realizing that we have expenditures that go beyond that, but we've not been assessed any impact fees beyond that level at this time. Presumably, as we go forward with additional buildings, we will have future impact fee assessments, and we may determine at that time to seek additional credits. But right now, the only assessment we have is for the 94,128. And my understanding is we did the exact same thing that the Ray Hall team did, which is we just paid the initial deposit and took our appeal at the time the initial assessment was made. Thank you.
Lance, would you concur with?
Generally, yes. Just to explain a little bit more about this project, US 421 is a state road. The town does not invest money in the state roads, and the improvements that were provided along 421 were turn lanes into the project, and those are a development standard. Those are required. Got to have your turn lanes coming in your projects. Where I think the most opportunity exists is County Road 300. They have provided, and I drove up there today to make sure I spoke accurately today. They have provided a continuous lane along County Road 300 in the eastbound direction. It currently dead ends at the end of their project and therefore serves as a turn lane into the project. However, it could be extended in the future. That, I think, in my opinion, is a prime example of starting to add capacity to our roadway network. They did their part in front of their project to add an extra lane. So I think absolutely the improvements on County Road 300 are aptly eligible for your consideration as an in lieu or a credit type project. Beyond that, I don't know that I'll say anything more. I'll leave it to your discussion and answer questions. But I think that's a prime example and very apt. And Mr. Price made comment of a question I was going to have, which is how many times we're going to come back to this well. Now, looking at their construction costs that they've provided, that shows basically what $500,000 basically on County Road 300 South. We got about 3/10 of a mile of frontage on 300. I don't know what all went into this price, but I think that the board should take caution that you don't establish a credit at this point of 500,000 and keep coming back. Those construction dollars, I would want to have some type of review of them because that's pretty costly, and I don't know what all goes into it. However, the initial ask of 94,000 certainly, I think, is less than it would cost to put in an additional travel lane of roadway, and the ancillary improvements such as drainage are eligible. We could go out and add a travel lane and install the necessary pipes and drainage. So those are all eligible costs. So for the ask for today, I think it's very appropriate and justified, and I don't have any question or any issues with the amounts that are being considered. But I think they're going to need refinement of these costs to determine how many times you can come back to this well and get credits as future projects come online.
Matt, did you have any comments about the calculations?
I think it's just like the previous one. It was pretty straightforward from a calculation standpoint.
And if I can, Mr. Chairman, I very much appreciate Mr. Lance's comments. And like I mentioned, I think that we can certainly handle it as when and if we take a subsequent appeal, we would just have to provide further refinement to those numbers. I think as he identified, so that you'd be comfortable that we're not getting more credit than what is representative in the work we've done that benefits the greater community. If that makes sense.
And Matt, do you have an opinion about the construction costs that were presented?
No, I think Lance is right. I think because we know this is going to continue as they build more buildings, probably a more detailed breakdown will be needed. But again, I would agree with Lance that it certainly was more than the 94,000 or whatever
you,
it is. So
you talked about the 0.3 of a mile just going eastbound. What about, I thought there was a westbound component to that and turn lane that got added to that, or is that?
There were some lane configuration changes that were made in the existing pavement to allow for westbound left turn movement into the side. But again, in my mind, those are site access and they're required development. You've got to have turn lanes into your project, but certainly this widening they did on their side of the road certainly is an eligible expense in my opinion.
And if I'm understanding it correctly, that if we granted a credit for the full amount requested at this particular point in time, since they paid a $5,000 application fee, that we'd be resulting in a refund at this point?
I think administratively, we're a little bit of uncharted waters here. I think we would work with the developer. Clearly, they're going to bring something more in. We would like to avoid, returning payment just because it's clunky procedurally, requires council action for additional appropriation. So we would engage the developer and say, can you let this sit and act against future projects? So we just try to work with them, I guess, figure it out.
Do the number of weekday trips that were calculated here get impacted by the fact that 421 is a state road? Does that make that?
no,
Is
that
there
doesn't,
no
no, that
impact
doesn't
on that
matter
at all?
No.
Okay. I was wondering if there was any type of.
And I've been, I've communicated with Mr. Harris just as we were listening to the dialogue, and we're fine just having the town hold the $5,000. We've got multiple things to work through as we go through future buildings, and administratively, we're happy to just work that out with the town going forward.
I see it very similar to the last.
I do too.
And
I do too.
mhm.
So would you like to make a motion?
I would suggest we stay consistent with the last, a partial. That definitely both are going to benefit versus a whole entire waiver. Would you agree?
Yeah,
Or would you-
if we approved a waiver for half the amount requested, there will be other applications for waivers
Mhm,
when they refine their construction cost.
mhm.
Could I, Mr. Chairman, could I clarify something? I think what Mr. Lance was saying is that we have justified the 94,128, and it would be if we wanted to go beyond that, that we would have to provide additional detail. Because our project actually is adding capacity to a intersection that's within the study area. So I mean, it's a classic credit case, not like the prior case.
Yeah. Then I would propose a motion to approve the amount requested for a credit of $94,128, subject to the developer working with the town on an administrative basis for the $5,000 that has already been the original application fee. Also, it'd be subject to verification of the actual construction costs associated with the improvements on 300 South. Do I
I'll
have a
second the motion.
Okay. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? Motion passes 2-0.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
The next item on the agenda is an appeal for the Tipsy Mermaid, 135 South Main Street.
Hi, I'm Greg Merrill. I'm the owner of 135 South Main Street, which used to be Serenity and will now be the Tipsy Mermaid. I've made a significant investment as a small business owner in this property to preserve the original architecture and create something that I think will contribute significantly to the spirit and the vibrancy of the downtown. We provided information to the board in the appeal letter that discusses some of the differences of opinion we have with respect to the way the previous establishment and the current proposed establishment are classified, which feeds into the way that impact fee is calculated. The other thing that I think might be relevant to the discussion is that since Sherry Jenkins would be operating the Tipsy Mermaid, and since she already operates Noah's Grant, which is, just a stone's throw away, she'd be using the same vendors for both. So the additional trips and so forth would be, I think, actually fairly minimal because they would make deliveries at both locations. So I think that should be taken into consideration as well. Open it up to any further questions if the board has, or David, did you have anything else you wanted to say?
Sure. David Roush with office at 170 South Main Street, and sort of evaluating this project has we're happy to say gonna open its doors here shortly, but it's not been one without a lot of challenge to get over the line, and we're really pleased. Greg and Sherry have both been very significant advocates of getting done what needs to get done here, which includes an originally not anticipated addition to the building. I think the foundation of our questions here are in 2 or 3 different categories. And not being, expert in Matt's work, there was an intimation that the restaurant, the Tipsy Mermaid, would be a sort of a more high turnover kind of place than Serenity. And we actually believe that might be opposite. And that might be hard for anyone to discern, and we're happy to answer questions to that end. But much like, although not the same menu and offering, it is a full service restaurant that is table centric. There are 14 bar seats, but a number of tables, and it's certainly about the food and about sitting down, having your order taken, serviced, and that sort of thing. So, and we understand that contributes directly to the trip count. The other thing that came back in discussion with town staff was that the size of the building it contributes a lot to the road impact fee difference. And as Greg mentioned, we are, as we understand from other projects, believing that there's a kind of a net comparison of the way a project operated to the way it will operate. We provided some math on the kind of the net differences on the project, and what may not be evident into one's eye looking from the street is that a significant part of this project is actually back of house storage, kitchen, infrastructure that didn't exist in the previous stead. We do acknowledge that there is a slight increase in the number of seats, but understanding that outdoor seating doesn't necessarily count the same. At the end of the day, our number of seats are actually fewer in total, inside and outside, than the previous user. Now, inside there is an increase, but outside there's a significant decrease. So we did our best, and probably we're outside of our lane a little bit, to try to provide, a trip analysis. And just as a way to sum this up, to suggest that in our mind, to go to maybe Mr. Lance's comments, the impact of this project on for lack of a better word, the infrastructure of the town is much less than what we believed or thought we were hearing from the town itself, and so are therefore asking for reduction in the impact fee, if not a complete waiver of what our math was $1,227. So with that, we're happy to say, answer questions as you may have them.
And for clarification, the original impact fee, it was now.
So Matt, was this classified as high turnover? I think that's kind of the crux of the
Yeah, this is,
application here.
yeah, so this is, every use comes in and you kind of have to do your best to classify it with the data that's available. And to me, when they describe the operations and even in their letter, I think it fits very well with the high turnover classification. Probably the harder part was classifying what the previous use was, because as my understanding, it was more of like a tea room kind of a deal. I don't think they had a huge menu. I never stepped in there, but to me, it probably exhibited more of a fine dining, which is a lesser trip generation use. Again, I probably would not classify that as fine dining perfect, but when I have to start looking at uses and how that use behaves, the closest to something in ITE I could find.
Yeah.
And that's where I settled on fine dining.
There's other restaurants in that area, right?
Yep.
How are those classified? Are those high turnover?
It would depend, like if it was what I would call, like Noah Grant's would most likely fall under the fine dining. If it was.
What about the Brick Street right next door?
I have not been in there.
Yeah.
Anytime you see a bunch of bar seats,
Yeah.
people order off the menu, the price points, $12 to $20, maybe. That's probably more high turnover.
Okay.
It doesn't have to be part of a chain. I know that's mentioned as typically they are, but it doesn't have to be.
Have you reviewed the waiver application or the reduction application, and what were your thoughts on?
I did review it again. I think it boils down to, I guess, two things. The square footage, they talk about seats, and then the square footage and maybe not all the square footage being available for seating. It's more, restrooms and whatnot, kitchen area. Generally, the square footage is used to do the trip generation. That's been our standard in the town. So generally, we don't like to switch the variables. We like to stick with and be consistent. And it really doesn't matter what that square footage is used for, because a lot of times we'll get the calculation. We don't even know. It just says this many square feet. So I would argue that using square footage is probably consistent with what we've done in the past. As far as the land use types, again, I do feel it falls under the high turnover. Again, it kind of depends on what Serenity looks like, but there's still going to be a net increase, even if we say they're both high turnover, because it's a net increase in square footage. A few things to note. When I got my original sheet, it had basically 3,600 square feet. And it looks like on their detailed breakdown, some of that square footage was possibly outdoor seating. And typically outdoor seating is not included in the trip generation. So there is a little bit of room for recalculation based on that, in my opinion. And there's also could make an argument that maybe some of the high turnover, when we talk about high turnover restaurants in the data set, does include some restaurants that may be open before 10 a.m. Not all of them in that data set are open for breakfast, but some of them could be. So there could be an argument that let's reduce this to account, I'm assuming it's not going to serve breakfast, to account for the fact that some of those trips in the data set include maybe a little wider range of opening times than maybe this is. And that it would generally be like probably between 15 and 20% of a reduction.
Could I add a few points on that? A couple things. I think if you look at the menu for Tipsy Mermaid and you look at what Noah's grant is, the amount of time somebody's going to spend at a table in either of those two establishments, I think is going to be very similar. So if Noah's grant is fine dining, then this should be. And Serenity, which was, you know, cucumber sandwiches for lunch and a glass of tea. I mean, that's seemingly to me as far from fine dining as, I mean, it was a place for a quick bite to eat for lunch. So again, those just don't really seem to line up. Additionally, the square footage thing, part of what's being provided is, you know, a much more, like, for example, a cooler, walk-in cooler. Serenity had none of those things. So they had to bring stuff in every single day for their operation. So by setting up a better infrastructure, we're actually creating less potential for trips. And again, those same trucks are going to show up to Noah's Grant. They're going to walk across the street and deliver to Tipsy Mermaid.
I think that's probably true on the truck deliveries. If you maintain the same operator, but correct me if I'm wrong, if the use of the property doesn't change, then there would be, when there were two different operators, there would be no additional impact. Correct?
Say that again. I'm not following that.
Well, if you had two different eating establishments, right, and they had common operators, so that they would get deliveries
Right.
off of one truck.
Right.
So it would not generate as many. But if that ever changed in the future,
Right. And
you'd never capture that.
right. And quite honestly, we don't even consider that when we get calculations. We don't know what truck's serving what uses. So if it's just a building from scratch, let's say, and the building across the street is served by the same trucking service or whatever, I would never know that. So it's not really taken into account.
And Matt, on your 15 to 20%, you said that was mainly because of the outdoor seating
No,
change, or is that because
that would be the hours of operation?
Oh, the hours of
Typically, yeah.
operation.
Typically that, and I can get the exact number because it would depend on if we're talking about opening at 10 or 11 or 9 or whatever. There is data to go back and look at that. But we could take that out if it seems like, you know, that's a good course.
And is there an impact on the calculation between the fine dining and high turnover? Is that, I mean, what are we talking
Yeah,
about?
there is. So on a square footage basis, for per 1,000 square feet, the high turnovers roughly, I think it's right around 100 trips per 1,000 square feet. And the fine dining, I think, is right around 80. So there is a difference. And again, I think
20%.
Yeah. And I wouldn't argue that Serenity is typical fine dining, but in order to I would argue that it certainly would generate less traffic than the Tipsy Mermaid use. So the goal there was to find something that kind of fit, that also generated a little bit fewer trips, because I would tend to believe that the Tipsy Mermaid is going to generate more vehicular traffic than Serenity did.
Respectfully, having lived in the community and office within eyesight of this property for 15 years now, I would also argue that your evaluation, with all due respect, needs to be based on the pro forma and the numbers of the operation, not necessarily their individual business success, and would encourage the, you know, evaluation to be rendered accordingly. I would vehemently agree with Greg that the Serenity operation had its ups and downs, but because of their offerings, really, from a layperson in this topics or in this subject's realm at least, is way more closely aligned with a higher turnover because of the limited menu and the fact that there was a lot of social lingering, for lack of a better word, of the customers that would come there during the day as a pleasant place to be, while Tipsy will, in fact, and we can bring Sherry to this forum if that would be helpful, align much more closely with Noah Grants and Convivio and Auberge and the other, what we would consider to be full service. And fine dining is unfortunately there's a lot of vivid images that come to everybody's mind when you talk about any of these things, but from a program standpoint is very much in line and on par with those restaurants. And I think there's even a menu now online for that's been out for a little bit. So I would ask for, and I do understand that the outdoor dining component is maybe difficult to account for formulaically, but you may or may not remember the south patio at Serenity, although she only filled maybe half of it, was significantly furnished. It was a big part of that operation, obviously in warmer weather. I don't know how that obviously falls into this, but certainly it's something that we would and did take into account as we went through development plan and so forth. So
the calculation that's been presented to us for consideration is really, the calculation is not made for a change in use from high frequency or high turnover and fine dining. It's actually just the change in square footage to account for the outdoor eating space, correct?
This was probably something that maybe went one step farther than we should to in terms of providing a calculation. But what we were trying to do is basically say, at worst, in our opinion, there's a change in square footage and related the square footage, building square footage per unit. And then if there is a parallel cost because both uses before and after are equal, that's the calculation we came to. Matt, being an expert, may or may not, find that to be right. It did not go so far as to say we actually believe that use is inverted. We believe that it actually goes the other way in terms of the pro forma operation of the prior use to the use that we're going to have. It is just trying to say at worst we're on par. So
from the zoning standpoint, the way this got approved was as a similar grandfather kind of thing based on what Serenity did there, the size of Serenity, the number of seats and all of that. So there was some recognition there now as far as what the new establishment is going to be versus what the
and I'll venture further into unfamiliar territory if I can, and I'll look at Lance on this, but this project includes a couple of additional parking spaces which were provided as a function of this evaluation. I'm assuming that those, while by statute, we don't believe those parking spaces were a requirement of the project, but the fact that we were able to provide them, could one argue that that's taking a burden, albeit small, off of the town and its infrastructure. I could certainly be out on a limb that won't support me on that, but would offer that as well.
Matt, do you agree with the disputed fact of the square footage?
No, just simply because we typically would take the net square footage of the building. However, that said, I would say that if they have some of that square footage, like I said, mine was roughly 3,600 square feet. If some of that square footage, which it looks like it is with their new calculations, if some of that's outdoor seating, then certainly a recalculation can be done using just the between the walls, basically, not unless the outdoor seating is something that's going to be used, every day of the year. It has whatever walls or, those climate controlled systems that they can, yeah. So I would argue that could be reduced out of the square footage, the outdoor seating
Some
area.
unknown amount.
Yeah, it looked like it's like 400 and some square feet, I think. So leaving the building at like 3105 according to there. So
Yeah.
that would reduce it because my calculation was based on basically 3,600.
But we haven't established that 3105 is the correct number.
No, unless we should.
So I can clarify that. So what was in the attachment of the letter was first floor area only. So because the second floor is from a code zoning standpoint unchanged, really, there's very little other than paint work going on up there. So if you were evaluating based on net differences, both numbers would go up incrementally. I can provide you with those numbers. That's probably where you get to the 3,600 because there's probably 400 square feet on the second floor that is not in these calculations
It looks like on this
on
sheet,
either the existing or the new.
yeah, it looks like on this sheet, it says 3,105 is the kitchen and then the seating area combined, and then the outdoor seating's 485. So that the 485 plus the 3,105 would get me close to the 36.
That's probably correct. And at the same time, the existing square footage would also have, so if we're looking on a net basis, the existing square footage or the par value would also raise, if you follow me.
Yeah, and on that, we used basically 1,620 square foot of the Serenity. It was a little less than that, but essentially.
What I would suggest.
Again, I guess I would like to just keep on the table here, the potential penalty that a owner might be being asked to pay for putting into place a responsible amount of infrastructure to service a building, and whether or not the shared services are part of this. I mean, we can see what happens when that over the road semi accidentally gets down, Main Street or whatnot, which fortunately doesn't happen very often, but anybody that's in the restaurant business certainly understands that it's much like trash. The more capacity you provide, the less burden you have on just the ins and outs every day, whether you're servicing it every day or you're servicing it twice a day. So I don't have numbers in front of me, but when we consider what we would consider to be a very high square footage of kitchen to dining space versus what we had, which was a very low percentage of square footage, that sum turns into a calculation here, which implies that there is a higher burden on the infrastructure of the community. Whereas in fact, I think in reality, it might be opposite, just because of the fact that you're allowing a much better operation, both in terms of staff and then ultimately guests as well. But again, I don't think I can say it clearly enough that we do think that the definitions that were rendered in the original road impact fee are actually inverted from where they should be. And all we're trying to do is say, at worst, if they're on par, this is what we think. So leave it at that.
I would suggest we table it to the next meeting so that we can confirm the facts.
I'd like to make sure we're on board with the classification. I think, like we said, that has some impact on there too. And then of course, the square footage does as well. I think there's the high turnover definition to me feels off. It based off of, from what I'm seeing, it would be helpful to maybe know what your hours are. I think you're saying that you're not going to be open for breakfast.
And now the only plan is for dinner.
So it's only a dinner.
Yeah,
Yeah, maybe brunch.
And brunch, start brunch on weekends, Saturday, Sunday, thing.
Okay.
But not lunch during the business.
When I think of high turnover, I think of fast food restaurants that serve way more than that. Do you have a rough estimate of the number of individuals you're planning to serve? I'm assuming in your pro formas you have some feel for that, or what your turnover rate's going to be from in the table
Sure.
standpoint per night?
Yes, we do. I don't have those in front of me right now, but
Okay.
we can certainly provide that. And I would agree. Again, this is a little bit of unfamiliar territory for ourselves. So, as we read about high turnover, I see a lot of things that are not this restaurant. While and Matt, I think you even mentioned, when you see a lot of bar seats. So what is a lot of bar seats is 14 out of 80 seats a lot. I don't know. And as we think about, and you would maybe not have a way of knowing this, but as you look at this product that's going to come on market, I mean, it's very much on par with the restaurants I just mentioned.
That's what I was interested in. Is this consistent with the other restaurants that are all right in the area? There's one right next door. There's.
How would it compare to Salty Cowboy?
That's a great question. I would say in a very sort of anecdotal way, it is much closer or much farther away from a casual dining, if you will. Salty, although it has table seating and has, kind of a full service operation. It's more limited menu. And I don't know where to draw the line on whether something is bar centric or not. On a scale of 0 to 10, if I put Noah Grant's at 8, I might put Salty at 5 in terms of, versus going to a Panera Bread or something that was much more, bar centric. I would put this closer to Noah Grant's, maybe not 8, but 7, really very close.
It's a full service, right? Not so.
Absolutely.
Full service restaurant.
It is.
Go in, order yourself, pick up your food.
It will be operationally very similar to Noah Grant's. And I don't think I know the price points. I don't know if they're all established yet. They will definitely be closer to Noah Grant's than a $12 taco or something like that.
It'll be higher than Salty Cowboy, it'll be less than most.
Yeah.
They're exactly.
How about comparing it to the Friendly Tavern?
Pardon me?
How about comparing it to the Friendly Tavern?
I think it's quite a bit more than the Friendly in terms of both the ticket as well as the transaction, the amount of time someone spends there and whatnot. Those are all apt comparisons. Although they're, it's now dark, the Lemon Bar might have been, I don't know. I can't speak to that. I just don't know. But and clearly then you get off menu with some of the other I'll just leave it at that.
Good.
I guess my other question for the board, I respect your process, however that is. When you think of $90,000 for a development out on 300 and so forth, and I understand it's very apples and oranges as to what they did and the investment that I, as a small individual, have done. But in terms of the impact for the community as a whole, I think it's significant given prime location downtown. And I know those aren't all the factors that roll into an impact fee, but if you want to table it and get a whole bunch more information, happy to respect that process. On the other hand, it's $15,000 and it's a lot of people's time to go back and forth on this. So if there's some, wiggle room on Matt's end or the board's end in terms of, how is it classified, which square footage is there, how long are people going to stay, et cetera. Honestly, many of those answers probably aren't objective things that we can really determine. And some of this is, my ability to get out of work at 3 o'clock in the afternoon to come here. And so if there is a way to come to a conclusion today, that's fabulous. If not, I'm fine with that too.
So are you requesting $15,000 or $1,227?
I'm requesting that the board make a determination that they feel is appropriate based on the information discussion provided.
I would like to have some more clarity.
I'd like to know what the number would be. I don't think it has to be too much. I'd like to see the classification and the value of the difference there. I know I keep going back to that, but I think that's.
Do we need to have a motion to table an item?
Yeah. You do.
Gentlemen,
If you decide to table the motion and continue, then I'd recommend that you set a date and time for the next meeting so that we do not need to perform public notice again. So the public notice will be now at this meeting for the next meeting.
Agreed. Yeah.
How much time would it take you guys to confirm your numbers?
Just so that I can be clear as to what exactly do you guys need to see so that we make sure to give you what you.
Well, one would be a calculation of what you're asking for in this particular application is for $1,227.80 to be waived because you dispute the fact of the square footage. So we need the square footage confirmed. And you're asking for consideration of the proposed use or what the prior use was, with no calculation at all.
I'm sorry, you want us to be advised calculation based on it being different turnover established.
If you are requesting, if you are appealing the assessment based on that purpose, then I think you need to provide that calculation. If you want it to be considered.
Sure, we have to answer the question. I think we can probably, because all of this is at our fingertips now, we can probably concisely give you something, within a week. I would also say though, and maybe if it's not clear, the request in this information was to make the request for the reduction of the road impact fee from $15,476 to $1,227.80 in total. So that would be the request that we have put on the table in front of you, just for out of an abundance of clarity. How we get there is maybe a little less scientific than the way Mr. Brown might get there. We're happy to give our best shot at that, but that is basically informed by two factors. One is the net square footage, and the second one is the fact that we are saying there is no change in intensity in use from fine dining to casual. In a tabled environment, we may actually have to involve someone more expert than us who might be able to help convince ourselves that it actually reverses itself.
Because I mean, if you're reducing to $1,227 at $106 per trip, that's 11 trips. Is that even? It seems very small to me for any type of a restaurant.
Yes, sir. With respect, it's only the net change, the difference in trips, and that is derived basically from square footage analysis and square footage from the ITE tables. So that's all that math is trying to demonstrate. And as I mentioned at the onset, since we are not experts, we might have been ill-advised to have actually included that specifically, but maybe it's a good platform to at least have this discussion. So
Yeah, I mean, if we can confirm the square footage, I mean, we could make a motion on that.
Yeah.
Tonight. But it is what we're looking at though is the waiver based on that erroneous fact of $1,227, right?
But note that they have the trips per unit at 7.8. I don't, that's not a correct number.
Okay.
So
Yeah, compared to 140. I mean,
Yeah.
What would other restaurants and
well, like
I'm assuming
it's like
reasonable.
100,
I'm assuming you're in the hundreds.
Yeah, 100. The high turnovers are just north of 100, and the fine dining is just around 80.
Okay.
So I don't know if
for 1,000 square feet
peak hour, yeah. So
these numbers just came right from the IT.
I mean,
calculations. So that's okay.
It could be a situation where they used AM peak hour or PM peak hour data, which not the weekday. So I just wanted to note that.
Then I think we need to pick a date.
I mean, it seems like the calculation can be done fairly quickly now that the information is available.
But Tuesday, the 28th.
That will not. I am out on the 27th to the 29th, 30th or 31st.
Good, the 30th.
30th.
And then I believe Zionsville spring break starts
Mhm.
31st.
Yep.
So let's shoot for the 30th.
Okay. Yeah.
What time? What time do you want to do it on the 30th?
Are you gentlemen available on the 30th?
I'm sorry,
Are you available on the 30th?
I'm out of town.
Go later in the afternoon. It would be 4 p.m.
Yeah, anytime in the afternoon.
Okay, 4 p.m.
I've got a 3 o'clock. I can't be here between 3 and 4, but maybe Amy could be.
Okay.
So whatever you want to do.
4 o'clock on the 30th.
What date was that? Can you just give that
The 30th at 4 o'clock?
of this month, March?
Yes.
It doesn't look like there's any conflicts with the space. So I think that should be fine. There's no other meetings occurring at that time as far as we're aware.
Okay. Then is it sufficient notice that it become part of this meeting?
Yeah, date, time and location. Be clear.
It'll be in this room. Yeah. All right, thank you. Is there any other business to come before this board? Hearing none, then I would accept a motion to adjourn.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
I will second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Passes 2-0.
Well, I think I'll be